Alright, let's say something controversial. I think a small roster for Bleach Rebirth the Souls is a very bad idea. A small roster means that after playing with certain characters for a while, it gets boring. The main thing that people have to remember is that casual fans are the first people playing this game first, then this whole pseudo-competitive nature, oh my god, FGC type shit. That's just me simply saying that when it comes to anime games, especially ones with huge rosters or cast of characters, when you give a game that doesn't even give you at least a half of the characters that had important or at least a good amount of time fighting, it kind of makes you think, like, did they actually consider, or were they only aiming for the FGC? The biggest thing is that when we look at games like, say, Dragon Ball FighterZ, typically rosters are smaller because those games aren't prioritizing the characters. When it comes to anime games, biggest thing that gets people to buy is the characters. And if the series has a plethora of characters, it gives reason that there's more chance that the more characters you have on the roster, the more people are going to be excited. Aside from games like One Piece, because One Piece is just a weird enigma, most series, if they have a huge cast of characters, people are hyped. If they have a small cast of characters, people kind of get burnt out. A good example of this is the early days of Demon Slayer. The first Demon Slayer game didn't have demons, and there wasn't a plethora of DLC characters. Quite literally was boring after a bit. In terms of just character selection, you had 5 different water style users that you cannot tell me that you enjoyed that. So essentially, looking at that game and then looking at a series like Bleach, there's a couple reasons why it doesn't even make sense. You have volumes 1 through 48 to utilize for this game, and you're telling me that, again, assuming you only had to give us a small roster? Doesn't really make sense to me, but I can understand the counterclaim. Smaller roster means they have more time to cook, make sure the characters are better balanced, make sure that the game essentially has the opportunity to be competitive. But I can tell you this much, most of these developers are not worried about if a game could be competitive, more so if the game could be balanced and it can be enjoyed from a different angle. But it still does come down to who's going to be the main people that play this game first? Bleach fans. And if Bleach fans don't see a significant amount of characters that they wanted from the cast, it's going to disappoint. For me, a huge cast only makes sense when the series is known for having a huge cast of characters. Naruto, Dragon Ball, One Piece, Bleach, essentially anything in the big 3, or even a series that is finished that has a huge cast of characters, I think has the opportunity. But within the last several years, most anime games are being adapted based off of series that are being pushed forward seasonal. Things like My Hero, Once Justice, Once Justice 2, of course, has a small roster because it doesn't have a lot of characters and people were introduced to make playable. JJK, same thing. Season 1, Season 2, you don't have a lot of content to go off of to make characters and to make season passes for the foreseeable future. But then when you look at games like, say, Dragon Ball, even if they wanted to, say, cut that roster in half, it still has a huge roster. If they would have prioritized 70, 80 characters or just went a different route, that still is a big cast of characters. Only anime games, in my opinion, can get away with having that, because the trade-off is that if you make the game too balanced or too competitive, you might scare off people who want to play the game from a casual sense. And if you make the game too casual, then you run a risk of, is your game going to get boring or not too fast, and are the people who you were aiming for, the casual fan base, are going to stick with it for a long time? Because right now, the number one thing you gotta ask yourself, who's it gonna ultimately entertain more, the Bleach fans or the non-Bleach fans? I mean, I'm just saying, because for me, I'm a Bleach fan, and I think I'm gonna be mostly playing this game because I like Bleach, not because I'm like some fighting game guru that wants to use this game as the next stepping stone in my journey of becoming the ultimate fighting game YouTuber or some shit. I like Bleach. If this wasn't a Bleach game, my interest would be elsewhere. That's not to say that the gameplay or anything is boring, it's just that if I wasn't a Bleach fan, I wouldn't be interested in this game. Like, the Demon Slayer game got announced and I have yet to make a video on it because I am not that interested in the game. But if that was a Bleach game, it'd be a different conversation. I'll be real with y'all. And I think when you look at it from a casual standpoint, there's people who are only interested in this game because it's a Bleach game. And I think the developers and Bandai need to make sure they understand that. Because even with 30, 35 characters, you still run the risk of not having particular characters, and with only 4 characters that are going to appear on the season pass, you just run the risk of either A, your game becoming too repetitive, B, people had wanted other characters that you guys didn't put on despite having the amount of time and proper planning to make it happen, and or 3, you guys try to do multiple years worth of DLC and then years later it finally becomes the game that it should have been in 2025. I'm not here to shit on people who want a small roster, and I'm not here to say bigger rosters better, but I am here to simply say that depending on the series, depending on the cast of characters, fan favorites, and more, you run the risk of people not liking the game just off a pure roster if it's too small. And if it's too big, you might run the risk of having a Dragon Ball Sparking Zero situation where all the characters play the same. From what we see in Bleach Rebirth the Souls, all the characters don't necessarily play the same. I mean, same inputs, but in terms of abilities and stuff, they don't play the same. Is it possible that the roster's bigger? Is it possible the roster's smaller? Only time will tell. Me personally, I would much rather have a medium-sized roster, something that's closer to 50 to 60 characters. I know, oh my god, it's too much because but it's like, remember, who is this game ultimately for first? And ask yourself this: are they going to get bored for having like really balanced, competitive-esque characters, or are they going to be completely fine with that? Because depending on how long the devs / Bandai hope people play this game for, that might either come back to bite them in the ass, or it might pay off depending on how they do the roster. But I saw this conversation come up. I think 2 people talked about this. Essentially, this video is me basically saying, hey, look, I think it's going to be controversial to say I want a bigger roster. I do. In comparison to a smaller one, I want a bigger roster. And if you don't agree, just please don't just prattle to me in the comment section about why a small roster is better. I mean, like, but basically what I'm saying is that I don't necessarily care enough to have a crazy in-depth conversation about this, but if you want to talk about it in the comment section, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm Akai saying, let's try to get 200 likes on this video, and I'll catch you guys later.